Dear learners, today we are going to discuss in this class the International Bill of Rights. So far, we have discussed the evolution of the concept of human rights, that is the Western tradition of human rights, of course, and that we have started from Magna Carta of 1215 when the barons, nobility, or the nobles or the clergy, they forced the king to accept certain demands. After that, we found that there was a civil war in England. Charles first was beheaded. After that, again, one king was, forced to abdicate the throne, and then William of Orange accepted certain demands of the people, and that was called Glorious Revolution. That was a bloodless revolution. That is also considered as the establishment of parliamentary democracy and constitutional monarchy from there. Then we found that American War of Independence was there, American Bill of Rights was there. Then French Revolution, where liberty, equality, and fraternity were emphasized, and all these revolutions, they played a significant role in uh, in what is called incorporating the civil and political rights, or the first generation of human rights, in the catalog of human rights. Then we discussed how the socialist movements, and they were built up because of the industrial revolution. Industrial revolution has already created many problems for the working class. The plight of the working class was something that moved many people. Karl Marx, Engels, and other thinkers, they pointed out the fallacy of the capitalist system, and how the capitalism was responsible for the plight of the working class. And then the working class started demanding socio-economic and cultural rights: right to work, for example, right to adequate wages, for example, equal pay for equal work, for example, right to health care facilities, right to education, etc. All these rights were demanded. These rights are called positive rights. Socio-economic and cultural rights, they are called, positive rights. These socio-economic rights, you see, created ground for many other developments, and the treaties or the convention that were adopted by the United Nations, they incorporated civil and political rights as well as socio-economic and cultural rights. So we discussed about the Bolshevik Revolution of Russia of 1917 that came under the leadership of Lenin, and then how it influenced many other revolutions in the different parts of the world. For example, 1949 revolution of China. uh, then there was establishment of socialist government in many other parts of the world. The socialism and capitalism, these are the two antagonistic ideologies. Socialism, for example, believes in social control over means of production, whereas we find that capitalism believes in private ownership of means of production. Socialism, especially Marxism, that advocates abolition of private property, whereas, as John Locke pointed out, that right to estate, that is right to property, right to liberty, and right to uh, what is called life, they are sacrosanct and they cannot be taken away by the state. So that is why the two antagonistic ideologies, two divergent kind of approaches we find. Because of this, conflict between socialism and capitalism, you will find after the Second World War, the world got divided into two hostile blocks. One was the socialist bloc led by the Soviet Union at that time, and then another was capitalist bloc headed by the United States of America and other Western European countries. The Second World War had already created many problems. Most of the economy, though most of the countries that fought the Second World War, their economy was in a very bad shape. Unemployment was there. There was, the rights of the people, most basic rights of the people were compromised during the Second World War, even right to life. So that is why you see after the Second World War, there was surge in the human rights movement. And this was the reason that the human rights as an issue, that started from Magna Carta was becoming a very, very important issue. Then what happened that when the United Nations was established in 1945, it was basically established what is called to save the succeeding generation from the scourge of war. The war that was fought, and this was the most destructive war in the history of humankind. So that is why the pacifist sentiments were very strong. People wanted that the succeeding generation or the next generation, they must be saved from this kind of destructive wars. And that is why the United Nations was established. When the United Nations was established, and if we see the aims, objects, and the purposes of the establishment of the United Nations, of course, international peace and security, or what we call the to save the succeeding generation from the scourge of war, becomes the most important purpose. But at the same time, you will find in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations, it was mentioned that to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. I repeat, reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights was one of the purposes of the establishment of the United Nations. So that is why in the UN Charter itself, you will find human rights were mentioned, and it was said that United Nations will try to promote these rights. Human rights will be promoted by the United Nations. So we can say that it is the people of the United Nations have given this mandate to the United Nations, and it is incumbent upon the United Nations to protect and promote human rights. It is not only international peace and security that is the responsibility of the United Nations, but also promoting human rights is also the responsibility or the duty of the United Nations. As we discussed that after the Second World War, the world got divided into two hostile blocks, that was capitalist bloc and the socialist bloc, and the Cold War started. The United States of America declared communism as danger, red peril, and containment of communism was the policy that was unleashed by the United States of America. On the other hand, the Soviet Union was trying to counter. Military alliances were also, signed by these two blocs. NATO that we see today and the Warsaw Pact that was earlier. These were the manifestations of the Cold War. So the military alliances were also signed by these blocs. There was arms race, mad race for acquisition of arms and weapons, nuclear bombs, missiles, deadly missiles, all these blocs they wanted to acquire. A sense of insecurity, mutual suspicion, all these things were there. So because of this ideological antagonism within the United Nations, it was very difficult to reach on consensus on the catalog of rights. But credit should be given to the leaders of the United Nations and the persons like Mrs. Roosevelt for developing a kind of agreement and universalizing the concept of human rights. So, one of the most important developments that was the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on 10 December 1948 by the United Nations General Assembly. This Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as the name suggests, nomenclature itself suggests, it was a universal declaration. It means, if you see the significance of this document, it was a universal declaration. It means it was applicable to all the nations and the people and all the people and all the nations, whether big or small, and they all agreed upon this. It has a preamble and 30 articles. 10 December, the date 10 December is very, very important, and that is why all over the world we celebrate the International Human Rights Day on 10 December, just to commemorate this occasion when the UDHR, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was adopted by the United Nations. This Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one of the most cited documents of the United Nations. It has been translated into more than 500 languages of the world, and it becomes a reference point whenever United Nations is developing any kind of mechanism of human rights or mechanism to deal with peace, harmony, etc. You will find this universal declaration is cited or quoted. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has also inspired many countries to incorporate the provisions of human rights in their respective constitutions. For example, in India also, in Indian constitution also, you will find when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations at that time, the Constituent Assembly of India was already deliberating upon the constitutional provisions and what kind of rights and duties should be incorporated in the Constitution of India. So, like India, many other countries were influenced by this particular document that is called Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The beauty of this document is that, or this, of course, it is a declaration, so that is why it does not have what is called implementation mechanism. It does not have implementation mechanism, but even then you will find that imposes moral obligation on the countries to implement the rights that are there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The beauty of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is that, considering the ideological division in the world at that time between the capitalist and the communist, you will find that in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, both the sets of rights, that is the civil and political rights, championed and demanded by the Western liberal nations of the world, they have been incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At the same time, socio-economic and cultural rights that were demanded and they were championed by the socialist bloc, they have been also incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that's why it got wider acceptability and respectability in the international arena. And this is the reason that you'll find that Universal Declaration of Human Rights played a very important role in what we call internationalizing or universalizing the concept of human rights. We will discuss in detail about the articles of the UDHR and all in lectures that we will be delivering later on. Now, what we have to understand that this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was called by Mrs. Roosevelt as Magna Carta of Mankind, you can understand the significance of this document. That Mrs. Roosevelt called it the Magna Carta of Mankind, and it was the standard of achievements for all the people and all the nations. After, you see, when this was adopted on 10th December 1948, the criticism was that it was merely a declaration, it was not a legally binding document. So if the countries were violating the principles and the provisions of UDHR, there was no mechanism to punish them or to mount pressure on them, so that they respect the provisions and the principles of UDHR. But we can understand, this was just a beginning, and it created a kind of respectability and acceptability for certain human rights, and that played a very important role in other treaties and the convention that United Nations adopted later on, because the countries were sensitized, people were sensitized about these rights. There was a lot of discussion on these rights on the UDHR everywhere. So after that, you'll find that from 1948, it took 18 years when two legally binding international covenants were adopted by the United Nations. After UDHR, you see, UDHR was only a declaration, so that is why it does not have implementation mechanism. But now two legally binding international covenants were adopted by the United Nations, and they were adopted in 1966. The first was the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. or what we call ICCPR, and its optional protocols. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, you'll find that it emphasizes on the rights of individuals, especially civil and political rights. It also has implementation mechanism. Three kinds of, it has optional two optional protocols of ICCPR are also there. One is the individual petition system, and the second is the abolition of death penalty. That was the optional protocol. So when the ICCPR was adopted, it also has implementation mechanism. In the implementation mechanism, we find three kind of things are there, and that can be called the implementation mechanism under International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. One is the reporting system or the reporting procedure. So the countries are expected to submit their periodic report to the relevant body, and that discusses the report submitted by the countries. These country reports are also supplemented by the reports submitted by the NGOs and other human rights organizations. So that is why a lot of discussion you will find on this issue in the Human Rights Committee. After that, it also has the provision of interstate complaint system, and that is the second provision or the second way of implementing. So if the countries agree, then they can go for interstate complaint system. So for example, if the human rights is violated in one country, then the other country can uh, point out, and it can submit the report on that. Then it has individual petition system, where the individuals are you know free to approach the committee for the violation of human rights, which are mentioned in the ICCPR. You see, one of the criticism of the UDHR was that it provided rights to individuals. The group rights were not addressed. Here you will find in the ICCPR, under Article 27 of the ICCPR, rights of minorities have been also mentioned. So that is why it has a strong implementation mechanism, and that is why it is one of the most important treaties of the United Nations, one of the important instruments of human rights of the United Nations that emphasize civil and political rights. So it can be understood that during the Cold War, when the world was divided into two hostile blocs, it satisfied the aspirations of the capitalist bloc, first of all, and of course, these rights were sacrosanct for all the people. People were demanding these rights all over the world. So that is why it is not only capitalist country, but of course, the capitalist thinkers like John Locke and others, uh, or the liberal thinkers, they have championed these rights. So that is why they were given due recognition under this covenant that is called International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. After that, you will find, to address the socio-economic challenges that you can understand after the Second World War, especially during industrial revolution, there were socio-economic challenges, but after the Second World War, these challenges became more acute, and that's why most of the countries were reeling under poverty, unemployment, starvations, and all that were there in the different parts of the world. At the same time, there were colonialism, imperialism, and this was the reason that the socialist countries and the socialist movements all over the world, they were demanding socio-economic rights. So ultimately, United Nations adopted simultaneously with when the ICCPR was adopted, then you will find that this covenant on economic, social, and cultural rights was also adopted. It is called International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This was also adopted in 1966. In the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, we will find the rights like right to work, right to health, right to social security, etc. They have been mentioned. It also has implementation mechanism, but not as stringent, as strong as it is there in the ICCPR. Why? Because you see that one may ask that why ICCPR has such a strong implementation mechanism and ICSCR does not have. Why? Because the implementation of the ICCPR or the principles and the provisions of ICCPR does not need resources. It just needs political will by the state. On the other hand, you will find that the implementation of the provisions of ICSCR, that is economic and social rights especially, they need enormous resources, and that is why all the states would not agree to such a treaty or such a covenant which was going to be binding upon them. At the same time, they were not having adequate resources to implement these provisions. So that is why this was the reason that the socio-economic rights and the that are mentioned in the ICACR, they need a lot of resources, and that is why, so this kind of implementation mechanism was not there as we have in the ICCPR. But later on you'll find its optional protocol was adopted, yeah, that too in the 21st century only. And then its optional protocol is providing a strong implementation mechanism. Together we you see, so what happens that when we are discussing this international bill of rights, what do we mean by international bill of rights? You see, international bill of rights means, first of all, number one, UDHR, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted on 10 December 1948. Then number two document that is an integral part of this international bill of rights is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that is ICCPR, adopted in 1966. Then the third important instrument is International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So, these three instruments of human rights and their optional protocols, they are together called International Bill of Rights. And this International Bill of Rights, what is the significance of this International Bill of Rights? That this International Bill of Rights inspired many countries of the world, and it becomes a reference point. Now you'll find that socio-economic rights or the civil and political rights that are incorporated in the various constitutions of the world, they have been taken from this important document, that is International Bill of Rights. It means Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the civil and the International Covenant and Civil and Political Rights, and that the economic, social, and cultural rights, that covenant is there. So that is why it has inspired many constitutions of the world. After that, you will find that after adopting these treaties, the United Nations so far has adopted more than 100 instruments of human rights, dealing with all dimensions of human rights. And that is why, while discussing the evolution of the concept of human rights, we already discussed that human rights is ever expanding, it is dynamic, it is evolutionary. So that is why the constant evolution of human rights we are seeing. So after this 1966, if you see, but before that, we should remember that before the adoption of UDHR, there was already a legally binding treaty that was adopted by the United Nations, that was Convention Against Genocide. It was adopted on 9 December. UDHR was adopted on 10 December. So we cannot say that the United Nations was not doing much, since genocide was a major threat at that time. There was Holocaust in Europe, 60 lakh Jews were already killed over there, and the threat of genocide was there. Minorities were being persecuted in the different parts of the world. So that is why you will find this genocide convention was adopted. After that, you will find that today what is happening, that more than 100 instruments of human rights are there under that have been developed under the aegis of the United Nations, and they deal with different dimensions of human rights. For example, you see rights of the child, or rights of children, or rights of old men, rights of disabled people, rights of women. Now rights of transgender is being discussed. Environmental rights, rights of indigenous people, convention against torture, convention against forced disappearance. All these convention treaties, they have been developed under the aegis of the United Nations. So the journey that we started from Magna Carta, the Western tradition of human rights, while discussing, we tried to trace its origin In the Magna Carta of England, 1250, the Glorious Revolution of 1688, the American War of Independence, and the French Revolution, all they emphasize civil and political rights. Then the Socialist Revolution. In the conclusion, we should remember the Socialist revolutions and movement provided the impetus to demand for socio-economic rights. After that, the establishment of the United Nations played an essential role in universalizing the concept of human rights through Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or ICCPR, ICSCR. The UN Charter and the International Bill of Rights are landmarks in the journey of human rights. It cannot be denied that the UN Charter, which is having provisions on human rights, but after that they were elaborated through this International Bill of Rights, and then more than 100 instruments of human rights that have been adopted by the United Nations. And we can say that the contemporary edifice of human rights is standing on these pillars. It means that the if you see the structure of human rights that we have today at the international level, or the nation, no, or the countries and the nations who are supposed to promote and protect these rights, all this is standing on the strong pillar of international bill of rights. So that is why, something that we trace from Magna Carta in the 13th century, and we came to the 21st century. uh, the contribution of the United Nations is something that cannot be underestimated. It is the United Nations that has universalized the concept of human rights. It has played a very important role in developing consensus on the catalog of rights. Now, if the different kind of rights that are being emphasized and the people are demanding, United Nations is playing a very important role in the development of the catalog of human rights today. But again, we can say that the rights that we have today, they are not exhaustive. Many new challenges are emerging. For example, we already discussed that fourth generation human rights. Now United Nations has, of course, it has to move to, or it has to ponder over the fourth generation of human rights, the advancement in biotechnology and the advancement in other kind of technology that is creating new challenges. We talked about cyberbullying. We talked about, the cyber terrorism. We cyber trolling, right to access internet, all these things you see now. So this is the reason the ever expanding nature of human rights is to be understood. With this, we come to conclude our lecture on evolution of the concept of human rights. Thank you very much.